Ladies, gentlemen, I wish you a very pleasant end of times.
Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
This is Tristan Shone from Author and Punisher, here live from San Diego. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Tristan, how would you describe the music of Author and Punisher?
Well, I would say genre-wise it's changed over the years, but in general I just go for the industrial doom tag. It's all about bass and sort of sawtooth on the low end, heavy kick drum, but the vocals have changed a little bit over the years.
So we'll speak more in depth about the instruments that you use. When you say doom, this is the discussion that comes up on the podcast regularly. What is the nature of doom? And do you think it's tied to any particular instrument or any particular sound?
Well, that's a great question, actually. I don't hear people talk about that often. Yeah, I mean, because obviously there's stoner doom, there's you have industrial doom, you have more like shoegaze doom stuff that's now. But yeah, I think one element is lyrically, it's got to be pretty dark, and I think a lot of bands will, we've been predicting the apocalypse and the t-shirts for a while and doom, and it gets a little old sometimes because it's like every t-shirt's got some thing written on the arms about like, oh, as we, dissolve into, I don't know, pits of disgrace. There's always like some quote from some book, So it gets a little old. Like, okay, well, there's all sorts of different types of doom, but it's got to have that heavy, low darkness. And I would also say like really good sound quality, as opposed to like black metal. I think there's like this sort of lo-fi thing that is sort of I don't know, it's part of what they see as like their musical vibe, but I think doom metal is high fidelity, low heaviness.
So the low end is important. Would you say that the pace is important as well?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the bass is pretty slow. And for me, because I'm playing the drums with my right hand, I do program some songs from time to time too, which you'll notice some faster songs, but I'm sort of limited by how fast my music can be. So it plays to my strengths as a doom musician, because I can't play that fast anyway.
So we'll speak about your right hand and sorry, did you want to say something else?
No, it's just funny. We talk about my right hand all night.
So we'll speak more about the instruments that you created and you used. Can you tell me a little bit about your musical history before Author and Punisher?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I was always musical. My mom got me into playing piano when I was young and didn't always love it, but I'm really, I owe her a lot for sort of forcing that on me. I'm a very, very musical family. My brother was probably the only one who wasn't playing an instrument, but he is now. So he and I kind of jam out on the acoustic guitar. My dad was always into folk music, guitar playing. All of our neighbors would get together and play, the old classics, Joni Mitchell, Crosby, Stills, Beatles. And then I started getting into like Led Zeppelin, and I lived in a pretty rural area. So like I didn't have a lot of exposure to some of the stuff, some of the heavier, more progressive music. Like I hadn't even heard Black Sabbath until I got into like high school. It was mostly just like Led Zeppelin. It was like the heaviest thing I knew. So like I started playing in bands in high school that were heavy. When I got into the Melvins and Neurosis and Godflesh, they were heavily influenced by that kind of stuff. And by the time I got into college, I had a band called Empathy Test, which was a drum machine based band. And then I had a band called Falkirk, which was kind of like my first band that I would say that played a lot of shows. And that was more like, Quicksand meets like Mastodon, like Neurosis, that kind of stuff. And I was playing guitar and singing. And then after that, I went to Boston in like 2000 to 2004 and had a band called Born, which was like a more progressive band, more like maybe something like Tool or modern day Mastodon. And that's pretty much it.
When you went to school, you studied robotics. Is that correct?
Among other things, I was a mechanical engineer, and you had to kind of pick a focus. So yeah, I picked control systems, automation, robotics. I would say it was more on the automation, and they call it like mechatronics now, which is well, I won't bore everybody with the details, but like less about like those kind of big programmable robots that you would see in factories. This was more like kind of on the more on like the research side, like kind of coming up with custom mechanisms that used motors that combined electronics and mechanical design to sort of achieve tasks. And so that's still what I do. I work for a microscopy company or a lab where we sort of, among other things, I modify the microscopes and make small changes and add mechanisms to better move like, cells underneath microscopes.
I think when people think of author and punisher, they're really focused on the implements that you use to create music. But specific to the music itself and the songs, was there anything from either your background or things that you were listening to at the time that you wanted to explore? This industrial doom sound that you described?
I mean, when I first started coming up with the ideas for this,
Yeah.
in the early days,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I was absolutely into, let's see, the Jesu album when Justin Broderick first started that project. I absolutely loved that, And also coming out of playing in a band with many members and vocal harmonies and like dueling guitar bits and stuff, I really wanted to play guitar with very simple drums, and I wanted to make stuff really heavy and simple. And so I love, obviously Godflesh, Fear Factory, Meshuggah, and then I know those aren't like the slowest bands. Some, Neurosis and the Melvins. Those were the certain, some of the elements that they had. That was what I was really into, and finding my own tone, because even though I started on guitar, eventually I switched to just playing synths. I sort of had to create that buzzsaw low bass tone with a synth, through a sound system. And so that was a fun experiment, like running things out through cabinets, building my own sound systems. And so I would say from like 2005, when I was in art school, because I went back to art school, through like 2012, in the early days, I was really like, when I was building all the instruments, I built 2 sets of instruments, got rid of guitar players, got rid of a drummer, and I really sort of honed my own thing, and that's where by about 2012, I sort of had my thing down, I was really a one-man band.
I spoke to someone who wrote a book about US black metal, and I'm not sure he completely agreed with my assessment, but my feeling is that the US black metal scene really took off when musicians who were in isolated areas had the opportunity, because of technology, to create the music that they themselves wanted to make without finding other people to play with, or without compromising to the tastes of whatever collaborators they might have met. Was that at all part of the reasoning behind wanting to be a one-man band and create your own instruments?
Yes. I mean, I had moved away from Boston and sort of was becoming like blazing my own path as an artist. And I think I got really frustrated with playing with musicians because of just, unreliable, and you also spend forever and then they leave the band. And I think really working I really there's something about being a solo musician where you don't have to make any concessions to other people's desires, and like, that's part of a collaboration. And you say like, okay, well, you get what you want and I get what I want. Maybe we make something cool. But for me, I had a real vision. And for many years, I felt like since like 96, I wasn't able to do that because I kept sort of getting other players. And I was like, you know what? I want to believe in what I want this to sound like. And part of being in art school in that location and having a studio and having the time, which I was lucky enough to be in an art program for 3 years in my own studio, to really just kind of like go crazy, and really just, I'm going to make this sound what I want it to sound like, and really experiment. And I think if it weren't for that, I would never have sort of found my niche and found my unique, what I think is unique about Author and Punisher.
So let's talk about your instruments. We spoke a little bit about the percussion, which I think you said you play with your right hand.
Yep.
And as far as the melodies come from, what are you using to generate those?
Yeah. So when I'm sitting, there've been times like if I go through my whole catalog of music and I can tell you like, oh, how did you write that song? If we go back and look at like a song like Terror Bird, that song, I had been playing my machines like kind of out and about in clubs for a long time. And a lot of it was improvisational. And so I would sort of like, I would find these sort of like parts that I would use throughout the performance, but all the songs blended together. That's in the early days. It was like a noise performance. So Terror Bird sort of developed out of that. So, and that's why I think it works live because it was written live, whereas if you wrote a song on your laptop and programmed it and then you went and tried to play it on the machines, there's certain restrictions, there's some restraints and issues with that because you might not be able to actually play it the way you programmed it. So most songs now that I plan to play live, I write them in the studio, right hand playing drums, left hand is either playing one of my pitch controllers, like the rack and pinion, the ingot, or the throttles, or my keyboard, which I still use. Is probably most 75% of the time I'm using the keyboard to play notes and chords. And I have two keyboards stacked on top of each other. And I'm not using the disc in like some of the really large things that I bring on tour because I took them on the tour with Tool, but they're just so fucking heavy, like 350 pounds. And unless I have a big tour like that where I have the resources for a big round, it's just not feasible. So when I write the songs in the studio, I'm playing with my right hand and my left hand, and it's sort of this like, I'm like a regular band, just jamming, finding things that work. And then as that song becomes a song, when I get the bass and the drums together, then I'll record that, to a click track or something. And then I'll go back in and start to maybe add some little melody synths. And sometimes I can play them like I can hold a chord out with my left hand and play a little melody with my left hand. But for the most part, a lot of those melodies that are on the high end and the synth swells and all is all sequenced. So I'll, and like little drum bits that I add in later, like sometimes like on Beastland, I found these like Indian percussion ensembles on YouTube, and I would like chop them up and run them out through distortion and sort of use them as like rhythm swells that I could play my stuff to. And so I use a lot of pre-sequenced material, but I'm playing the core of it. But now, like, with Beast or with KRU LLER, I'm taking a guitar player with me to play a lot of melodies because I didn't want to sequence a guitar on the road. People would just be looking weird at me.
How long before those original EPs did you arrive at a sound that you were happy with out of this period of improvisation and experimentation?
Well, drum machines, to tell you the truth, I go back and I value all of those things. Like Painted Army was like very much a carryover from the previous band. I had written those songs for the previous band, and then I wrote some new ones. So it's all guitar and then programming and Reason. Very much guitar. And there are like more songs. And then Warcry was, a big industrial thing that, and I like those songs. I'd like to play them, but they're very much like you'd have a drum machine and play the guitar to it. And I don't want to do that anymore. But then drum machines, I started to find the heaviness, like these crossover points, like half the songs were programmed and half of them were played on my machines. It was like noise tracks and then industrial tracks. And then after that was 2010. And then after that, when I got rid of the player I was playing with, Ursus Americanus was the album where I went solo pretty much and just, I took those improv sessions of 1 hour and broke them up into separate songs. And then Women and Children was very similar, but it was kind of like, okay, I need to find a way to repeat this every night because it was so hectic the way I would play live, like with pedals going everywhere and wires, and I couldn't reproduce it. And so I sort of had to like re-engineer my setup from a standpoint of like some things are automated and, you know, reprogram all my microcontrollers so that they all sync together in this way.
And for your vocals, you're also using a specialized input, right?
Yeah, so I use a thing called the Headgear, which I made, which was an 8-channel like MIDI controller, but it was just microphones, you know, in an array that I could put in front of my face, so I could both sing through them and also blow into them as like, you know, like a MIDI controller. Like it would pick up like a certain swell of volume, and I'd have a threshold in there, so I could blow in a microphone and like trigger a drum beat, or I could scream, and the louder I would scream, like a cymbal swell would be larger. And when I was doing these improv sets, that was a really useful thing to have. But as I sort of went on and started my songs, I was able to play things better on the machines. I like the microphone. I took the MIDI controlling out of it because I figured out another way to do that with my drum controller, the rails. And I replaced the capsules with better quality capsules because I wanted my vocals to sound better. And then now I've just built a new microphone that only has 3 in it, and they're much higher quality capsules. But it's 3 different effects. So you have like one that's like a nice clean vocal that I'll use most of the time, and then the one to the left in the middle will be like distorted, and then the one on the very left will be like some other effect, you know.
let's talk about KRU LLER. It's the latest Author and Punisher album, and it was released on February 11th of this year by Relapse Records. Let's start with the machines that you used for this album, because I understand that you actually either redesigned or came up with a new set of machines.
Yeah, so basically what we did here, and it might be a little confusing to some of the way that Relapse, the way that they framed this, but basically I've started a company called Drone Machines now. And there's three partners, one of Jason Began, who was one of the producers on the record, who I've known for a long time, and who's the synth guy, did a lot of the synth work on the album, and also is helping develop these instruments. And then Adam Reed Erickson, who's a mechanical engineer, longtime friend of mine, but product design engineer. So the three of us have taken the instruments that I have now, that I've been using since 2018, and have redesigned them into something that can be sold. And that involved, like, the stuff that I use is pretty raw. And so the ones that we've designed are, we've really cleaned up the tolerances so that the ball bearings, when the keys slide, they slide a lot better. The weight is really thought, the wires are cared for in a way that they're not going to break. And the electronics have been custom designed. The outputs will be like CV gate for modular synth setups, USB-C, so we're updating the USB protocol. And so when I say like new machines, like, yeah, they're all new, but they're basically the same machines, but completely redesigned into products. And people will be able to buy them eventually, but I'll be using them first to sort of test them out. But we just have prototypes. So I've been like using these like prototypes that we've been building throughout the whole process of writing the album. But I'm trying not to show anybody them yet, because I want to show them the finished products,
So when we say new machines, it's not necessarily that you redesigned your previous rig. It's just that these are like literally made from new materials. But the previous designs?
Oh yeah. These are completely new machines, but they're based on, like, I have one that's like the simplest one is just these knobs that they're all rack mountable, 19-inch. And you've probably seen pictures where I have this like setup in front of me that's like, there's like three layers, and there's like aluminum side panels where I can put all three of the machines, because we're making three different machines to start. I mean, this is just to get the ball rolling. Like, we have so many ideas where we want to take this, but it's really difficult to start a company financially. And so yeah, we basically have taken those three machines, and I gave the CAD and all the designs and sent them to Adam. And Adam has basically said, like, okay, we're going to design this into something that the electronics are enclosed, the things are machined. Maybe we'll replace the materials, use different materials. By any stretch, they're going to look completely different. They're not going to be as raw. They're going to look hardcore and like made out of rough materials, and everything is metal and wood and stone and granite. But yeah, they're new machines, but the ideas are the same.
I noticed you didn't say plastic.
Yeah, well, so I've been saying like no plastic, because I hate plastic knobs, and I hate the rubber buttons that are these knob arrays and everything. The whole theme of drum machines is to move away from that. But there are times so I remember we had a meeting recently, and I looked at the key and I was like, so that's a pretty complicated part. How are we going to machine that? And he's like, well, probably make it out of ABS. And I was like, wait, that's plastic. And I was like, I told everybody we weren't using plastic. And then he's like, well, we could make it out of aluminum, but he's like, actually the plastic will be, for this purpose, it's much easier because there's so many features. So it's not a question of so there are some elements I'm like, okay, but these are intended to outlast, like these devices are open source. You can reprogram them. You can update the chips, the code. You can buy parts from us. So like if a little piece breaks, trust me, they're going to be very difficult to break.
Now, the resistance to using plastics, was that due to any sustainability issues?
Well, that's a great point. I mean, so, if you're looking at carbon footprint, this is something we need to look into, but in some ways, using plastic could be more sustainable than using something like aluminum, because aluminum needs to be mined. Yes, aluminum can come from recycled products, but so there's a carbon footprint for each piece that needs to be looked into. There's also practices of like, where do we get things manufactured? So yeah, do you use wood? Is that good? If you're using a nice hardwood, well, hardwoods aren't really farmed. Like IKEA uses woods that are, somewhat sustainable because they have farms of wood that grows and dies quickly, grows very fast. So they can designate a spot to grow their wood that they use in their particle board and stuff. So, for me, like in some ways, if like we're looking at sustainability, I look at if we had to make a decision of using non-plastic, let's just say it this way, like if our device lasts, if someone has a device for 30 to 40 years or something like that, and it gets passed on to people or we buy it back, that's the best case scenario rather than having a device that they're going to throw away. And yeah, if that involves some plastic, there's a lot of old Moog synthesizers that have lasted forever. That's good. So people aren't buying more of them. They stay in the market. But anyway.
Let's talk about the music for the album. When did you start writing KRU LLER, and what were your intentions?
Well, I would say, getting back from, I had 4 shows left on this tour in March. I think it was like March 16th or something. And they canceled the show after the show in Portland, and I drove straight home. They canceled the next 4 shows. So sitting home, I got back, absorbed all that. Everybody freaked out for a couple months and, well, freaked out for a long time. But I went into my studio and...
I'm still freaking out, dude.
We're still freaking out. Yeah, still freaking out. We should be freaking out. But I would say we're a little more used to it. But I went into the studio with all my gear and sort of knew that this was going to be a big stretch. And for me, even though I missed 42 shows that were supposed to happen throughout the rest of the year, it was pretty much the end of my album cycle. So I was itching to write some new music, and I had learned a lot from the tour, and just about like basically what happened was I recorded every show, listened to myself, and decided I almost got to listen to myself as a fan and say like, what's working, what's not. And for me, there were some things that were pretty good and some things that I could work on. And so when I sat down in the studio, I just immediately wanted this really, I'm not going to say simple, but I wanted to have these like big chords, and I wanted to find these kind of brown note fifths and things that I could play that were satisfying in just this sort of way, that weren't abrasive and like angst filled. I wanted the album to not be a cynical thing. There's so much negativity in the summer about coming from the right wing America, and I just wanted to be hopeful and not just say fuck it all. We're doomed musicians. We're just everything. Life is terrible, and I wanted to kind of find these happy moments that had humanity in them.
Was this the summer of 2020?
Yeah. So I 2020, and then I started writing, and I would say I probably had the sketches for most songs done by October, November. But then like Centurion was a track that I did with Justin Chancellor. That one didn't really develop. And I had the basic drum beat program for it, because that was one of the ones I programmed on the album. Pretty much the only one other than Blacksmith. The first half of Blacksmith is played, I wrote it playing it, but then Jason wrote the second half. But yeah, Centurion was early 2021. Sort of came together later, but yeah, most of the sketches were done, and then I wrote a lot of the vocal melodies. After I got the sketches written down or recorded, I would listen to them and then come up with the vocal melodies, just kind of walking around at work and going on hikes and stuff like that.
When you talk about listening to your old material and listening to recordings and figuring out what works and what doesn't work for you, how would you compare KRU LLER to your previous releases? What is it about this album that you think works better than, let's say, your last album or your last two albums?
Well, Beastland, I can't really think of, obviously there's some production stuff that, basically in general, when I was on tour before the last three releases, you're squeezing these, like, I had enough time to write the songs, but you're squeezing, you got like, okay, you're off tour, you got 3 months to do this, and looking back now, I should have really just been like, hey, I'm going to take off a year. I don't want to tour for a year. I'm going to do this album for a year, but you get opportunities, you want to stay relevant, you disappear. And so this sort of clash of like what you think you need to be doing and what you should be doing. So I think some of the, I'm just really glad that I was able to have the time allotted for this album. Like I was basically mixing this thing from, January of 2021 through May. I had 5 months sitting at the same deck, like mixing and getting the sound and, bouncing it out, listening to it in the car, listening to it in my headphones, sending it to Phil and Jason to listen to. And that's huge, like having that time and knowing that, like, and not just settling on something. So I think from the tone, I really got the tone to be how I wanted it, like wide, large, bassy, just, I feel like when I hit my low tones, it like takes up a lot of space. And in the past, maybe it was a little bit more narrow and sounded like a single like bass going through a rat pedal. And then also really embellishing all the synth and guitar work to really fill up all these other spaces. And I just feel like it's a lush album now that it's satisfying when I listen to it. And I don't like to go back and listen to too many of my old albums, maybe a few songs here and there, but this one feels more satisfying.
So when you say simpler in terms of the performance, the instrumentation, do you also mean simpler in terms of the arrangements?
Yeah, maybe simpler in some of the arrangements, like chord patterns, and like I was using the pitch controllers a lot more on previous albums, and kind of making the whole riff, the actual pitch controller, like using the throttle to play all the riffs. And I think because this album I've taken some of the load off myself and put it on to a guitar player to do the mid and high melodies. I can just sort of hold down the fort with the low stuff, like hitting these chords and just cycling through them. And then a simple change, because my focus is on my vocals now. That was the biggest takeaway from the Tool trip and listening to myself, is like, need to make the vocals, that's what I wanted to hear more. I wanted to hear the vocals blended better. I wanted to hear more melody and less screaming. I'm not saying that was wrong in the past for me to have done it. Just where I am, where my headspace is right now, I wanted to hear that.
let's talk about your collaborators on the album. Can you tell me who else you have joining you on KRU LLER?
Yeah. Well, the two most notable, I mean, not notable, but the ones who did the most work were Jason Bagan, who goes as Viter. At Viter, he's a electronic producer and my business partner and in Drum Machines, a longtime friend, one of my closest friends. And he's worked on Crude Sectioning, which is the track that I sort of did in between Beastland and KRU LLER. He did a lot of electronic work on Beastland as well. I mean, he even was like helping me mix Terror Bird back in the days on that album. But he did a lot of the synth work and Drum Machine. Like I wrote a lot of the melodies, and I would go to his studio in New Mexico and we would like put them in and play them out through all his synthesizers. Like, because I just use, like, I have a few hardware synths and I have a lot of software synths, and I don't spend too much time getting the sounds to be the right sound. You know, I'm like, okay, it's good enough. But then he would run it out through a million different synths, and we would record, 10 different versions through different synthesizers and drum machines. And then I would take all that information back to the studio and sort of pick and choose what sounded the best. Yeah, and I feel like you can hear it. There's so many things he did. And then Phil Sgrasso, who's my manager also, but he's a guitar player who did, I wanted a lead on Glory Box and on Incinerator, and it turned into him basically playing on the whole album. He was like, hey, I think the low end, it adds a little texture to your tone. And so like, I was like, yeah, you're right. And so we did it on everything. And it was just amazing how well, I mean, these two guys are like opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of their sort of musical genre and where they're at in the music industry and stuff. Jason's electronic producer, musician, and Phil's a metal guitarist. But they just both, I don't know, maybe coming in from, I'm in the middle and they come in from different angles. And it just really, it worked, And they didn't have to work together. I just was like taking it. And then Justin Chancellor on Centurion, when we got back from tour, he wrote to me and said, hey, let's do a track. Send me some beats. And so I sent him some beats, and we just, for about 2 months, we were just sending the track back and forth until we nailed it. And then Danny's was like a little bit more like, I just was like, hey, I'm going to ask him. So I asked him, and he said he'd love to, but that he pulled his muscle lifting weights. And so we were like, I didn't think it was going to happen. And then about 2 weeks before my deadline, he said he just sent me some tracks and he had done it. So it was, And then my wife sang on Maiden Star. She did backups on the chorus. And so that was cool.
And did James Kent also contribute something to the album?
No, so James, he asked me to do a cover of one of his tracks because he released sort of an album of covers for XS. And so I did that, but it wasn't part of the KRU LLER process. So.
Okay. My mistake. So I should mention that Danny and Justin are members of Tool.
Right.
Not that this is a particularly name-dropping podcast, but just wanted to let people know that in case they want to check out their contributions.
Yep, sorry.
So in terms of Phil and Jason, will they be accompanying you on tour?
Well, no. So the stuff that Jason does, that he did is sort of in that ballpark of like, in the past, I might have tried to play all that stuff, but these are such finely tuned rhythms and synth swells and little melodies that we just sequence them. And it's not the kind of stuff that I'm playing the majority of the stuff. Like I'm playing all the major chords and lines and all the live drums and singing. But those little synth things, if you hear it, it's just like all the mid-high stuff. So no, I sequence most of what he has done. If I was like, some big band or whatever going out and playing huge shows, we would have him with me playing all of it live. But in this day and age. There's no money for musicians to do that, to bring people like that and pay them. And then Phil's band is tours a lot. So we thought about it, but I've got an old friend, Doug Sabalik, who plays in the band Ecstatic Vision, to come on the road with me to play the stuff in his own way.
Let's talk about the recording a little bit. So I forgot to bring this up, but not only do you have custom built instruments, but you also have a custom built sound system. Is that right?
Yep.
Can you tell me what the process is of accurately capturing your performances and capturing your music and recording it?
Well, yeah. So my sound system, like when I was on tour with Tool, I brought you normally a band will have a Marshall stack and like an Ampeg stack for their bass and guitar. I have done that because some of my tone does have that sort of guitar and bass distortion sound. And so, but because I've built my own, like for those tones, I built two 18-inch subwoofers that are, pretty basic, like direct radiating. I can't remember how many watts they are, like 800 or 1,000 watts each. And then I've got two scoops, which are like dub scoops that are like typical like reggae sound system speakers that my friend Matt and I built way back in grad school in 2007. And they're kind of beat up, but they are really good for like mid-range. And so when I show up and play through a normal sound system, I'll bring those for a little bit of bass and mid reinforcements, or I'll use it for a little bit of mid, for those guitar and bass tones, depending on, I don't know. I always change my mind. Sometimes I'll use it for one, sometimes for the other. When I went on tour with Three Teeth, I took my whole sound system, meaning my like huge 18-inch sub bass bins, which are these folded horns. So sometimes it depends. But for recording, yeah, in my studio, I'll record all the music and then I'll put a mic up to some of the speakers. And then, I just like to get the sound of what my speakers sound like. So all the sort of growly, like guitar tones are recorded directly from my speakers. And I just record them in my studio. And then I don't need a fancy studio. I've never really gone to one of those, you see these bands like, hey, we're out in Idaho at this giant studio recording. And I don't need to do that. I just record it right in my studio, in my practice space.
Now, do you have to approach recording in a different way, considering the depth of the sound system that you have?
Well, I mean, I definitely, because I use so much low end, I have to, I would say it's not so much about how I record how I track the stuff, but because a lot of that low end comes from the real digital stuff, not from anything recorded with a microphone. That comes from like using like 808, 808 like VSTs and Ableton, where I'm really getting that super low end. So that's all like digital stuff, or like using like a Moog, a Minotaur, or Jason had ways of like making the low end really come out. But no, those are just real sub oscillators. And for me, that just means you record it and then you can't just listen to it in the studio. You got to go take it in your car. You got to listen to it in your sound system at home, in your headphones, and make sure that bass is coming through. And it's powerful. And the kick drums and the snare drums, it's really iterations, recording it, going and listening to it, going back, tweaking it, making notes. And that's the thing. Like if you record this in somebody's studio, you've got like 5 chances to get that right because you're paying for it. Whereas if you do it yourself, you can just take forever.
And how long did that process take, getting the sound right, getting the sound to where you wanted it to be?
Yeah, probably about 4 months, from, February until May when I delivered the album. We delivered it in May of 2021. And then with the vinyl, because it takes like 8 months. That it was done, May of 2021. So you wait 8 months after you make that album you can relate to.
So you and Jason worked on the engineering and the mixing together, right?
Yep. And Phil would come down and sort of listen and give me notes as well, a lot.
And I believe you sent it to Brad Boatwright to have it mastered.
Yep. And Brad, and that was a process too, because I realized that I had, a lot of my bass was too gnarly. And so we had to dial it back a little bit, because we had to really turn the volume down in order to not have it kind of peaking all the time. So that was a process too. And he probably hates me right now because we did so many. I think it was 9 versions. I think Rev 9, we got it, and multiple phone calls. It wasn't because he did anything wrong. It was because I just kept maxing it out, and it was peaking and clipping. And, I'm not a professional. I'm a self-taught mixing engineer.
So Brad's name comes up on this podcast a lot.
Oh, cool.
A lot of heavy bands work with him. What would you say he brings to your sound, or brought to your sound, I should say?
Well, just being a fan of like the heavy music, he doesn't try to, what I think happens sometimes with mixing. And somebody maybe you don't know, or there could be the best name in the business, but he doesn't understand that like we value like grunge and sludge and dirge over like cleanliness and high fidelity, So like just, I would rather have the thing be distorted and sound gnarly than have it be clean and done properly by like technical standards. And I think Brad, would agree with me there,
So the album is out. Do you have any plans to promote it? I know that the rules keep changing as far as like, you know, tours getting announced, tours getting canceled, where people can play and tour.
Well, yeah, I already canceled the tour in February, so that's canceled. So now we're moved on to my second bit, which is like March 6th through or March 5th through March 10th, just going up and down the West Coast, starting in Tijuana up to Seattle and back. Then I'll be going to Europe in the end of March. March 28th is the first date in Warsaw. And that goes and finishes up in Russia, but you know, who the hell knows what our country's going to get ourselves into. So, and then I come back and there's Oblivion Access, which is a festival in Austin, which I'll be doing, which will have a string of shows, maybe 2 weeks around it. And then the fall is Perturbator and Health in Europe. So a lot of shows. At least I get to travel as a two-piece, so I won't be alone, which is just a nice perk of having another member.
And the Gimme Metal thing that you recorded, when is that coming out?
Well, it's already out. I mean, that was the live radio show. So it was like a DJ set where I was like chatting with, you know, fans live about like the songs I was playing and for 2 hours. So you can go onto the gimmemetal.com site and you can look for Author and Punisher DJ set and play the songs and hear I kind of talked about all the different songs and why they're important to me and why they were important during the pandemic.
Is it a DJ set in terms of you picking songs that you liked, or was it just songs from your catalog and the new album?
Oh, no, I only played 2 songs of mine. So I played Doppler and Maiden Star to sort of showcase like, you know, early stuff, later stuff, and an early song that I really liked playing. And then there was just everything that influences me from like electronic to drum and bass, dubstep through, and then some of the darker, and then some of the more like breakcore electronic metal, like that I like to listen to, like drumcore and autark, and then into the kind of classic doomy stuff like Melvins and Neurosis, and then into like Godflesh and Yob and stuff.
So KRU LLER is out now through Relapse Records. Tristan, what's the best way to get the album? How can people order it?
Best way right now is through Relapse Records store, so relapserecords.com, and through their store. If you're in the US, you can order it in Europe too. Holy Mountain Printing carries it, as does Evil Greed in Europe. So yeah, just hit up those places. Probably more record stores, if you want the vinyl, have them now than used to, if they made it through the pandemic. Or you can show up to one of my shows. We'll have plenty of vinyl and CDs. I don't have any Beastland, so it's only going. Yeah, I think I actually only have KRU LLER with me on the road this time.
Now, do you want to say anything about the colored vinyl that Relapse is putting out?
Oh man, if you didn't get a chance to get the black, it was kind of like black with like some splatter. For me, it was the standout. But because the artist Zlatko Mitev did, you know, I don't think we see that many, like, I don't know, sort of a vibrant array of colors on an album cover. It works really well with vinyl. So like there were so many options. I mean, I honestly can't even remember what all of them were. They just kept popping up in the last week as people posted their pictures on Instagram. So I kept reposting them.
Now, for somebody who's very specific about how you perform your music in terms of having your own sound system, do you have a preference as far as how people listen to your music? Like, do you prefer that they listen to it on vinyl? Do you mind if they listen to it on an MP3?
I don't mind if they listen to it on MP3 because I mean, obviously Spotify for me, like, doesn't allow you to play it loud enough. I'm the kind of person that listens to everything on fucking full blast in my ears and in my car. And so I've been listening to my album on SoundCloud, which allows like a higher volume. At least mine, but the tracks that I had on the private link that I was sending around to people for the last 8 months were loud as fuck. And then when we sent it to Spotify, they lower it. So at first I was like, what happened? And then I realized that they just do that with everybody. There's a dB limit. So, but in general, like I am fine. That's how I listen to stuff. I'm not a big supporter of these places, Spotify and iTunes, but I got too many battles to fight right now and other ways that you know, I'm not going to pick up that battle. But I understand the issues that people have with it 100%. And it's just artists aren't getting enough money, and that's clear.
Well, not in terms of the platforms, but in terms of the
Fidelity.
the fidelity. Just because an MP3 was pretty much designed to strip out certain frequencies so that people could send audio files over telephone lines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm just so used to it at this point that I'm okay with things being a little bit lower because I just play them so loud. I have to say I'm not super picky about that. In fact, I just find that vinyl for me, I have a good vinyl set up at home, and on a Friday night, we like to sit down and listen to records. But for the most part, I'm like, I love just being able to play music from wherever. I think it's more important to get yourself some nice speakers than to worry about the MP3 thing at this point.
Yeah, fair enough. And people can download the FLAC file or the WAV file through Bandcamp anyway. So
Yeah, full props to people that's really important too, because it does make a difference. Absolutely. For me, I'm just like I'm feeling the vibe rather than the sound quality.
yeah, no, I'm the same way. I do most of my listening on my commute to work, so I can't be that picky. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's like also with bass, you get, when you're thinking about like if you like for sound cards, if you have a shitty sound card, like when you're playing, like, if you have a PreSonus or like one of these cheaper sound cards, like most of the time you're never going to notice the difference between that and the Universal Audio, like $3,000 card, because it's the low end that you can't, it's not sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? It's lower. If it's lower,
Like the subtones?
just I'm saying like below 120 hertz, you wouldn't really be able to tell the difference on MP3 versus FLAC or something. It's the higher stuff where you really notice it, where you're starting to get like higher frequency rates and stuff when you have losses that you'd really notice. So when I'm listening to like lower heavy music like this, I don't think you notice it much. Whereas if you're listening to like, softer, poppier, or like classical music and jazz, you might really notice that lack in quality. Whereas when we're the heavy shit we're playing, it's just like hitting like, okay, good, it's heavy, it's got the kick drum.
Fair enough. And if people want to follow Author and Punisher online or keep up to date with what you're doing and the drone machines that you're putting out, what's the best way for people to do that?
Oh, for the machines, for drone machines. Yeah, I mean, we have a website, dronemachines.com, and also a Instagram _drone machines _ where you can sign in, or you can put your email in for updates. We're going to have some merch up soon. I think really in about 2 months, we will have our first products up. So just like stay tuned, and also on authorandpunisher.com or tristanshone.com, you'll see all the updates for like my tour and the new merch. Yeah, as I said, Holy Mountain Printing and Evil Greed are carrying my actual physical merch, like shirts and stuff. When I get back from tour, I'll have a bunch of new designs on my Bandcamp that you can buy from me. But for now, until I guess early March, I won't have those up there just yet.
And Author and Punisher is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all that good stuff, right?
Yep, all that stuff. Easy to find.
Very cool. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, I'm just, I just got to get to the studio and start rehearsing. It's like I haven't enough time to do it, so that's where I'm headed right now.
Yeah, I should mention this has been a long press day for you, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Yep, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing this when it pops up.
Great. Thanks so much, Tristan.
All right, take care.
right through me? Can you see it? It's right here in front of me, right now. What? sorry for you.